Hey y'all, so I'm super excited about today's topic. We are going to be talking about how to make standard operating procedures more accessible so your team has access and just to make it easier on yourself as well. So just come a few things before I just dive right in. As you can tell, I already got my screen share so I can use this to guide the conversation. Number one, everything I'm talking about, I do have links and they are affiliate links. I just like to knock that out the way. I swear by these software, so of course I'm going to share them. You do not have to use them, but highly suggest checking them out at the very least. Number two, a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about has been based off my experience when I had an agency and also how I help my clients with documenting their own processes and to keep it going and to update and all that good stuff. So I like to say, if any of these things do not apply to you or you feel like it's not going to work for you, this is very broad, but this is not set in stone. You do not have to use this advice. It is simply that, just advice what has worked for myself and my clients. And if it doesn't apply, let it fly. And there was number three, but I don't remember. I am a little congested right now, so I'll probably be going through this a little bit quicker than I normally do with these videos, so it might be a little bit shorter. However, if you have any questions, just leave them below. If you're on LinkedIn, send me a message. I will also leave my LinkedIn, as I will be posting this on YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, send me a message on LinkedIn and I'll get the questions answered. And of course, I will go over everything again at the end. And that's pretty much all I have. So we're going to hop right into it. So number one, process documentation versus standard operating procedures. So before you can worry about making your processes accessible, you need to actually have some. And also, too, when it comes to standard operating procedures, a lot of times, SOPs, standard operating procedures, a lot of times people confuse the two. So like standard operating procedures, by the time you're creating these are tested processes that you already went through yourself. You worked together with someone, maybe a specialist, went through them, all that stuff, and you're creating SOPs from that. You do not want to create standard operating procedures for someone else to follow if you have not tested the processes yourself. Yes, there are instances where you're probably trying something new. Of course, it's case by case situation, but for the most part, you should not be doing standard operating procedures until you have a dedicated process. So let's rewind it back a little bit. What exactly is process documentation? Just as it sounds, it is literally you documenting your processes. So everything that you're doing, all the stuff that you're doing in business, everything you do to help your business operate, you are jotting them down. Now, for this, it does not have to be perfect. For me, I work off like checklists or bullet points. So I'll make a little list. Hey y'all, hey. I will make a list. Sorry, y'all. If I see y'all comments, if I don't say anything, I promise I'll get to them. I am terrible with multitasking, but I see y'all. So, but yeah. So when it comes to documenting processes, it does not have to be perfect, so to speak. It can be simply you're doing checklists, you have your bullet points, something to help you follow and guide the situation. Because what's going to happen when it comes time to actually doing things, like as you can see here, I have the boards. I'm going to explain that in just a moment. When it comes time to start creating standard operating procedures. So like if you're getting ready to hire somebody, if you are in the licensing or franchising world, you want to step into that, this is what you'll have to do next. You have to make sure all your operational processes are documented and of course accessible for someone else to follow. So with that being said, when it comes to documenting processes, what I usually have people do to help, yes, girl, list. What I usually have people do to start off when it comes to documenting their processes is to, so we all know we're in business. If you are like playing business for real, doing business for real, you want to make sure your business is broken down to chunks. So like we all know, our businesses have like the key things. We have like our main company overview, which is our mission and vision, all that stuff, why we started. We have marketing, we have sales. A lot of people don't really have HR. We should start thinking about that because this is where the company culture shifts in. So I usually tell people to add that in. You can see mine's kind of broken up. You don't have to do exactly like mine, but you want to have the main departments in the business. And this is why I'm showing it all. So I have what I call the owner SOP. So these are the things where I keep everything that I'm doing now. So like if I'm doing something by myself or I'm testing out something new, I put it in there, the owner SOP. So like you can call it whatever, but I have it there so that way I can use it, and that's only for my eyes only. And when it comes time to create standard operating procedures for someone else to duplicate based on what I already have, I put it inside the appropriate department. So of course, if you're like a solopreneur, you're just starting out, you don't necessarily have to have all this stuff, but it's really helpful because when it comes time to it, trust me, you'll probably need it. But when it comes time to actually like splitting things up, it makes it so much easier. So standard operating procedure documentation. So the main thing you just need to know out of that is that process documentation is just as it sounds. You are documenting all of your operational processes. Again, it does not have to be perfect, so to speak, but it does need to be clear enough so that way when it comes down to actually doing the step-by-step actions for someone else to take, it makes sense. So like if you're jotting down, like I post on social media, like I'll say for myself, like I post willy-nilly. Like I don't have a thing and I know I shouldn't be doing that. Hey y'all, welcome. I should not be doing that, but as of right now for social media, I post all willy-nilly. So how that process looks for me, like process documentation wise, I'll keep maybe like a file in my marketing for social media and I'll make note of like all the captions I'm doing. So like if I'm talking about ADHD or process documentation or licensing, something of that sort, I'll write down like either the caption or I'll write down like a little snippet, like I wrote about this, and I'll keep track of how I'm doing things that way. I'll also keep track of like how much people are actually engaging with my stuff, like the likes, all the KPIs and all that stuff you can think to measure for social media. I'm also keeping note of that and I'll keep it in my notes. Hashtags, I'm using Instagram, I'll keep hashtags written down somewhere. Overall, so when it comes time to actually hire somebody to take over for me, I'll at least have like the caption stuff that I'm writing with. I know what people are liking on my content. And when it comes to like scheduling content, maybe I'll like make note like, oh, I did this before breakfast. So like maybe I want my stuff scheduled in the morning so I can go back in and engage with them during the time, like lunchtime or something. I can go back in and engage that way. But overall, I'm jotting down little things I'm doing now. It doesn't always make sense from the get-go, but you have it written down. So when the time comes, you're not scrambling like, oh my God, how do I do X, Y, Z? I never wrote this down. You have the notes. You just need to put them together and then also create a more organized step-by-step. Like, okay, I know I want to pass this down to somebody else to take over. Now, this is where SOPs come in. This is how I've been doing business because, again, SOPs, standard operating procedure, they're the way that you do business and usually the tested way that you do business. So, like, I've already been promoting. I already know what kind of content works on each platform. So when I'm passing on to somebody else, I'll just be like, okay, hey, so on Instagram, even though I don't have a set schedule, I do have this documentation. I know what kind of content works best. From what I've seen, you'll be able to work with the person that you hire for the job and they'll be able to duplicate it and enhance it because, again, everyone has their own way that they like to work. And even though you're giving a blueprint for someone else, usually, especially if they're a specialist in this area, usually they'll kind of like enhance it, like, hey, maybe you should do this instead of this, blah, blah, blah. And that's where the teamwork and everything comes in. But if you're just giving off process of like, hey, I need help scheduling content, I want it to look like this person's over here, and you have no type of process whatsoever, this is where all the miscommunication, all that stuff comes in. So get anything out of that? I know I was supposed to wrap it up like 3 minutes ago, but main thing out of this, process documentation, you write things down, doesn't always have to be neat. Standard operating procedures, this is the more neater way of how you do business, the step-by-step processes for someone else to follow. So keep that in mind. I'm going to go ahead and head into the next thing, which is integrating software, because of course we don't want to integrate software without actually having processes documented. So like I mentioned before you try to integrate software into your business, like making things more accessible, like I mentioned beforehand, like I have owner SOPs, I have it right here, things I only want my eyes on, or maybe like my operational manager or something like that to have eyes on. Everything else is for like the main team. So like you can break it up by like company overview, like again, I mentioned the mission and vision, all that stuff. Marketing, sales, like whoever you hire for marketing, if they're on the marketing team, they'll have access to that. Whatever HR processes, so if you hire someone to help with those type of processes or policies and things, they have access to that folder and that folder only, things like that. But overall, before you start adding the software, you need to make sure you have this done first. So this is why I mentioned before. So even if you're using Google Docs, OneDrive, any of that stuff, start getting into the habit of making them into departments and separating that way. You don't have to do it each month because, again, it's a lot to handle. It's a lot to handle, but like as long as you already have like a going place for them, it makes it a whole lot easier. And now when it comes to actually like sharing things, like making it accessible, this is where the accessible piece comes in. When you have a dedicated software for your processes, it makes it so much easier to share it with your team, because that's the whole point. You're doing standard operating procedures for your team to have access to, so that way they can do their jobs. So when it comes to that, I'm actually gonna switch it over. So I'm using two. Like I mentioned, I'm doing two. This is Whale. This is where I'm moving my stuff. Eventually I'll move it in there, but this is what I'm using. Train you, I'm gonna use this one because I already have like stuff already set inside that one. So, or like examples. So we're gonna kind of switch over, but they're the same idea. So when it comes to doing integrating software and stuff, so like I mentioned, having the departments, you need to have your documentation done first, and then whenever you're starting to do standard operating procedures, depending on how that works or how that looks, you can do it with the software at the same time or have help or whatever that looks like. But overall, we move on to the software. So like I mentioned in the last one just a couple minutes ago, like having access to certain things of the processes. So whenever you're moving things in software, especially if it's a dedicated SOP software or playbook software, I find it more beneficial to place in something like that just because I used to use ClickUp and stuff, project management tools. And even though, yes, I can share it to certain things, it just flows a lot better. So having this in a different like dedicated software works really well. But also too, which I'll mention again in a little bit, I want to mention how to actually do like the standard procedures here too, because it's one thing to put all of your processes into the software. You also need to make sure it makes sense. So this is where the inclusion part comes with standard operating procedures. So you have your documentation. It makes it easier, like again, having departments already, but like if you don't, it's totally fine. But this is why it's good to work with someone to help you do this part. But anyway, so when you're doing the standard operating procedures, you have your documentation. Whenever you're doing a step-by-step, having software like this makes it a little bit easier for you to actually break things up. I like that both of the software that I mentioned, they do have templates to kind of like help guide you along based on whatever you're trying to place inside of them. But if you're not at that part, that's totally fine. This is why it's important to have like the departments and stuff first and then moving them into the software. So like when you're doing, let me see if I have an example real quick. So like I mentioned before in like some previous lives, whenever you're doing standard operating procedures, it's one thing to have the documentation. Like yes, the policies and stuff are usually all going to be text-based. But when you're doing the step-by-step processes, you want to make sure you're staying inclusive. And by inclusive, I'm just saying keeping the content short, getting straight to the point, because a lot of times we write down a whole lot of extra steps when we actually don't need to. So making sure that we actually stay on task and then also mixing up. So like things like images, alternative text, having videos to kind of like help the processes, screenshots, whatever will help the step-by-step process actually, will help move along the process as well. So pretty much when it comes to the software, yeah, it's yes, it's for standard operating procedure and stuff, but like it also helps with the accessibility piece, which means like it gives you sharing options. And I'm about to mention like why I really like these things too in just a moment. Gives you access to share. Like I mentioned, I have like one section for like my own processes. So like I mentioned, own SOPs. So that way I have things set aside where no one else is going to read because I don't want them to have access to it. But then I have things where everybody has access to, and then only departments have access to. So again, the main thing you should get out of this part is that if you're going to integrate software, especially when it comes to managing your processes, I highly recommend that you have a dedicated playbook or software playbook that helps you with navigating the space and how to do the processes. And two, make sure whenever you're doing the process documentation piece, make sure you start sorting it prior. So that way it's easier, because like when you go into these software and stuff and you're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing or who should have access to what, it gets overwhelming, and a lot of times it's not going to be used. And if you're going to be intentional about using software, you need to make sure that you have things broken up first. So that is my little piece out about the software thing. So that's pretty much all I have about that, because it's just cutthroat. Like if you want to do that, you need to make sure you have things planned out first, if that makes sense. Yeah, exactly. Easier to focus. Okay, now the last one I want to touch on, the last piece, is updating expansion. So let's say that, yeah, you're using the software, you got the playbooks, like you understand that, like, okay, yes, it's supposed to be easier for sharing. But why should I have it like this when I could just put it in my project management tool? Like again, I mentioned I used to use ClickUp before I started moving my stuff into these playbook areas. So like, why does it matter? So I'm gonna tell y'all. All right, so number one, as we know, keep have struggled with, because it's a new muscle. If you weren't using it before, especially if you're years and years of running a business and you've been doing everything by like OneDrive, sharing documents and things of that nature, this is a new muscle that you have to use. So one of the main things I really like about both of these, you can set up like little quizzes or like checkpoints. So one, you can make sure everybody that gets added to the appropriate area, you can check to see if they're actually reading the policies and the procedures and all that stuff. So I really like it for that. And that's like one of the main things. So that's one of the main things, making sure people are actually using it. You can do quizzes, check-ins, you can see who logged in, when, and all that stuff. Of course, let them know up front that you're doing that, but you can let everyone know, like, hey, you haven't logged in about a month, and we've updated this like 2 weeks ago, like, you need to go ahead and check that out. But I really like it for that. And then also too, another thing, some of my people want to license or franchise, or if you're in that realm, like I don't want to build like a huge company. I just want to build it up enough to where I have my decoy and I want to franchise the stuff out. So when it comes to that, you still got to put everything in. Like I mentioned, you still got to make sure you have all your operational processes and documented. You can't escape that, because people want to see how things are working and they want to see the numbers. They want to see all that stuff. So outside of that, once you have everything documented inside software, what you can do, this is a little money maker thing too. What you can do is keep everything inside of the playbooks. And what I like to do is you can actually share all the stuff that you already have. So like if you have, or like you're about to, like I said, I was licensing. I lost my train of thought. So if you're licensing or franchising, what you can do is require all of your people to make an account with whatever playbook software that you're going to use. Send the processes to them, share the template. It'll be templates, but it'll still be the same policies that you have written down. You can share it with them, so you're not going through all your files and stuff, trying to figure out like, oh, what exactly are they people going to need, or trying to give them outdated information. All the stuff's in here. They have it. Share it with them. And then also too, that gives you like a little passive income too. So like not only are you getting income from them using your information or your framework, you're also getting money from the software, because this is a dedicated software. They have what is it, the affiliate stuff. You can have there's different ways you work around it. They already have the stuff implemented. You already have the stuff inside the software for them, so they don't have to go out and look and try to figure out something else. You can make money just because you're sharing a link, and it's just make things a whole lot easier. So like that's just a little thought to why I find it more beneficial to put it in an actual like software for sample procedures versus just putting them anywhere. It makes it so much easier. And then also too, I want to make note, I'm gonna stop sharing because there's nothing else I really need to share with that. And outside of that, when it comes to updating, so like I mentioned, this is a lot, a lot of information. There's a lot of stuff that comes with process documentation, actually sharing the stuff, making sure it stays updated. So what we like to recommend is either one, you can hire me or somebody similar that helps keep these things updated for you, or two, find trusted people inside of your business. So like if you have an operations manager or you have a manager in each department, depending on how big or small your company is, you can have them, or even a trusted employee, like maybe an executive assistant or something. But overall, you have somebody to help you manage this stuff, and then you can assign them to keep up with the documentation. How often it's needed is just depends on how often you're changing your policies and step-by-step processes, how big, like how much you're growing, if you're trying to scale, things of that nature. Then of course, when it comes to scaling or licensing or franchising your framework, if you make little changes here and there, just coming in, bringing somebody in for like a quick project, updating stuff for you and leaving it out, another option too. But like overall, when it comes to updating these things, the best bet is either having third party, like my company, come in and help keep things updated, or two, using your team, which I usually recommend people having their team, and maybe bringing someone like me in to kind of like help navigate, making sure things are being done properly type things. But if you're not at that point, third party definitely helps. And if you're not at that point yet and you are growing rapidly, or you're at the point where you can't move on without having this stuff updated, then bringing someone like me on is ideal. But if you're still kind of like, I'm not really making much changes, I'm still by myself, I'm not really thinking that far ahead, just making note. I like to, again, I'm a checklist person. So like using my project management tool, I'll add in like every month, I'll go in and check my software, I'll check my document and make changes that way. So the key thing is to make it a habit. So like if you are already using it, it's going to be easier for your team to use it. So like if you are just bringing it in later on, it may be it's going to be a newer thing, you got to get adjusted to. But if you are making an effort to have everybody use this stuff and you're utilizing the software they should be, everyone will get adjusted. Because again, it's a job, like we got to get adjusted to this. That's pretty much all I had to say about the accessible part. So like the main thing, just go brief recap. Number one, process documentation versus SOPs. Whenever you want to make your things accessible for your team, you need to, one, make sure everything is documented. You need to document all your operational processes before you try to create SOPs for your team. SOPs are how you do business, but they are the tested way the way you do business. So you have your process documentation, then standard operating procedures, you make that stuff for your team. Once you have that figured out, like how you have the processes step by step, then you already have everything broken down departments or whatever. Then you can integrate software. Once you integrate the software, again, I highly recommend using a dedicated playbook software just because it helps with the updating and making sure people are actually reading the processes and procedures the way they should be. So I highly recommend that you have dedicated playbook software, and both of them are awesome. If you have questions about them, feel free to send me a message and I'll let you know based on wherever you're at, which one I would recommend for you. And of course, integrating software, again, definitely integrate it after you've already started making it a habit of processing documenting your process. If you're not at that point yet or you haven't been documenting yet, don't worry about doing process because it's just going to sit there. Do that stuff first, then integrate software. And then once you integrate software, update it. Usually using your team, hiring someone like my company to help you update your stuff. Whenever if you're in the licensing franchising, I'm about to say framework. If you're in the licensing and framework idea, or you're like, this is what I definitely want to do, having a dedicated playbook definitely helps with that. But again, you still need to document all your operational processes and stuff. And then when it comes to updating, make sure you have a dedicated person for that. Make sure you are implementing policies yourself to actually check in with the SOP software and stuff and make sure processes are updated. Making it a habit yourself. When you make it a habit because you're a leader, other people will follow. So that is the main thing. You should get out of that. And I am pretty much done. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them below. Again, I will help answer anything. I will probably post it on YouTube too. So if you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn. I'll make sure I have that in the caption. That's pretty much all I have. So once again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will be hanging around the comments and LinkedIn.